Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. So I thank you so much for joining us, and especially to talk about this topic about outgrowing friendships. I think that is definitely something. And then how do you create boundaries there? That's something that I don't know, like you may or may not have talked about, but it's something that it seems like throughout we all experience, right? Losing friendships. And it's almost like a divorce. If you've had a friendship for a long time, right? And you kind of outgrow each other, how does that look? And then, just defining your own life, and maybe even friends that you want to have that now that you're older, you're not high school, right? Because everybody, I was talking about my high school friends or all my college friends. And if you're not that age anymore, how does that look for you? But before we get into it, and I ask you all these questions, let people know who you are, where you're located, what you do, and how they can find you.
Absolutely. So I'm Esther Boykin. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I'm also the CEO of a mental health company called Group Therapy Associates in the DMV, well, in the DC metro area, if you're not from here, DC, Maryland, Virginia. And so in addition to one arm of my company is a traditional private practice, right? So I've got about 12 therapists on staff. We see everybody from little kids to couples and adults and kind of everything in between. And then the other half of the company is called Therapy is Not a Dirty Word. And that's more of our online platform. So there's a podcast, there's all kinds of like online and in-person workshops and events. We create workbooks for people. There's lots of just kind of like different opportunities to engage with mental health in a very different way outside of the therapy office.
I love it because I love coming in at a different way, right? Because you have to meet people where they are.
Absolutely.
Super big on that. So how can they find you? Like, what's your website? What's your social handle?
Sure. So you can find me basically anywhere on social media at ESTHER'S. I'm probably most active on Instagram, but you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and all those places. And then you can also find my company at Therapy is Not a Dirty Word on Instagram. And then all of those are also like our website. So therapyisnotadirtyword.com, estherboykin.com. But yeah, you can kind of find me anywhere. I always tell people, I'm like, if you Google me, you'll probably find me.
Yeah, Google me. I love it.
You'll find the work that we do.
Okay, let's get into it. So let's talk about this friendship thing. Is that something that outgrowing friends, is that something that is bound to happen to someone in their life? Or like, is that just, is it going to happen? And if so, like, how do you deal with that?
I mean, absolutely. If nothing else, I mean, all of us have made it to adulthood having outgrown some friendships. Like, I know very few adults who are like, yeah, my best friend from second grade is still my best friend. I mean, it's beautiful when that happens, but most of us throughout our childhood and middle school and even, over the years of high school, like we outgrow friends. As we move into adulthood, though, I think we do sort of have this, we're kind of socialized to start focusing on different relationships. We sort of take for granted that our friends are our friends and they're just going to be there forever once we kind of get usually into like our early to mid 20s. We almost just ignore them in some ways, right? Like they're just part of our lives and we forget that their relationships, just like your romantic relationships, just like family relationships, that are going to grow and evolve, and some of those are going to change. Sometimes for the better, sometimes they're going to change in ways that mean that might be the end of that friendship.
Is that okay though? To have a friendship to end? Like, because I've had some friends and family members, and even my own experience, right? Where I kind of felt guilty, like, oh man, but we were friends for so long, almost kind of guilty that maybe I went on a different path or both of us went on a different path and I don't see that path the same for me or vice versa, however it happened. It's different. How do you cope with that, of like almost that guilt of we're not friends anymore?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that and this actually can help preserve some of the relationships, is learning to actually acknowledge that that's happening. I think going back to that place of like not feeling guilty or not wanting to acknowledge the fact that, wait, well, we're kind of heading in different directions. I mean, it's always okay for a relationship, be it friendship or otherwise, to grow and evolve. And sometimes that does mean you look up and you're like, oh, this is a person that I spend every weekend with, right? And I talked on the phone every day of the week. And now our lives look so different, or our values have evolved in ways that are different, that we don't have much to talk about. And ignoring that oftentimes can lead to a more difficult end of the friendship, as opposed to sometimes when we notice that's happening, then we can let the friendship evolve into, okay, well, maybe this isn't like sort of my go-to person every day. We're not spending the same amount of time together, but we do have history. We do still have fun together.
I want to go back to that cutoff, because how I feel like that happens so often. And then the friendship turns bitter, or what used to be,
Mhm.
right? Like I cut you off, and now like we can't even be cordial because of how I handled it, you handled it, how we both handled it. And then it's like, oh, it's like it's all those years and all those memories are now gone by the wayside because of how it was dealt with. Like, how do you deal with that instead of just cutting someone off? Like, how can you talk to them, or maybe even tell them, this isn't, maybe it's changing, and to address it, like you said, beforehand, as opposed to maybe being reactive. And then that's when you see some of that resentment creep up.
Yeah, I think that the reality is that it's hard for a lot of us. It requires a certain amount of emotional maturity and self-awareness. And I think going back to your point about sometimes feeling guilty, sometimes we feel like we owe people something because we have a long history, and we allow our guilt to get in the way of just being honest and being able to say to somebody like, we've been friends for ages, but I'm just finding, you know, this thing that you're currently doing is really difficult for me to spend time with you around or to support you in, or I don't, work is taking off, or I have a new baby, whatever is happening, and just kind of naming that. I think sometimes it's also much more about us on the inside than it is even having a conversation. Like, I think that there's many times where friendships are just drifting and no one says anything. And if you're not paying attention to why you're drifting apart, it's easy to start to blame it on the other person. Well, they don't call me anymore, or they're doing this, or they just think they're, whatever, too busy or better, or they're obsessed with, whatever, their new partner, their new job, their new kid, whatever's happening. And it's easy sometimes, it's a familiar pattern for a lot of us to simply blame the other person versus recognizing like, oh, I feel really uncomfortable because although there's distance, I don't miss them like I thought I would, or like I would have before. This friendship is changing, and it's uncomfortable to simply say to somebody, whether you're the person who is missing them or you're the person who actually is needing more space, it's sometimes just uncomfortable to say that. But there's a lot of value in being able to acknowledge your own feelings and then communicate them in ways that are not blaming, um, towards the other person, and also not self-criticism. It's okay for you to have evolved in a way that doesn't work in the friendship anymore. And you can just say that without making it about anybody's bad.
Yeah, I love that you said that. But like, I think the one point that you stand out is just accountability, and being able to even internalize, like, okay, it's just not working for me, and that's okay. And how do you make peace with that being okay? Now, that may be the work that you have to do on yourself, right? But the other person may not be there, or not,
Right. They might not.
So if you see that maybe you are going on different paths, and um, maybe you do want to keep the friendship for what it is, maybe, that friend is just my brunch friend. Whenever I want to go to brunch, you know, we're not what we used to be, but whenever I'm having brunch and I just need to get away, that's my brunch friend. Like whatever, we just go and have a good time. But you just want it to be that. How do you create boundaries in the friendship so that it can just be that one-sided thing, or, you know, it can just be that you seek?
So one thing I do think is really important to kind of note is sometimes we just need to own the boundary, and we don't actually have to have, like, if it's not where we're setting a boundary because somebody's doing something that makes us feel disrespected or uncomfortable, but like I'm just shifting the amount of time I spend with you and like the ways we hang out. We don't always have to have a conversation about that. And that's not to be passive aggressive or in any way, but sometimes it's just changing your own behavior, recognizing like, okay, I'm going to own my boundary. This is my brunch friend. I love going to brunch with her. I don't want to do double dates, and I don't want to go on vacation together. But brunch a couple times a month is really great. So invite them to brunch and just sort of let that be sort of what happens. Now, if that person brings it up, or for whatever reason, like you can feel that there's a need for a conversation, then again, making sure that you're really cognizant of just saying, hey, this is what I noticed to be happening in your life. I'm recognizing for me, like I'm sort of moving in different directions. I need more space, whatever it looks like. But, I really value the time we spend together over brunch. Like that's important to me. It's meaningful to me. And I'd like to continue to do that. And then part of it is recognizing that person gets to say how they feel about that. They might be like, yeah, that's cool. They might be like, well, that just feels superficial to me. And I want a friend where we go to brunch and we go to Miami and I can call you in the middle of the night. And then sometimes you have to say like, I totally get that that's what you want. I only have the ability to give you brunches. Mm-hmm. And if that's not enough for you in this friendship, then I respect that, you might make a decision about changing our relationship or our friendship or not spending time together. But it does require you have to figure out being okay with the fact that you may want the relationship to look one way and they may say that's not enough for them or that they don't like it. And you have to be able to accept that they're not wrong. And you're not wrong. It doesn't mean that suddenly you have to be like, okay, you know what, you're right. We'll just spend all our time together. Like, no. Okay, well, it sounds like we are in a period of our lives where we just don't fit together the way we used to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You're feeling like the friendship is more one-sided, right? It's I'm always available for you, or you whenever you need to call and talk, or you need to borrow money, or you need someone to pick you up, and it's always one-sided and it's never, reciprocated. How do you handle those friends and set boundaries with that?
I mean, I think it's sort of twofold is the way I would imagine it. And so one is it is about conversation, right? Like it is genuinely being able to say to someone, I do my best to show up for you in the ways that I think you need me to. When you call, I'm there for you. When you need certain things, I'm there for you. But I lately am feeling like the things I need from you, you're not available for. I think it's helpful to maybe you don't need to have a specific instance because then you oftentimes get caught in the content, as very therapist answer, right? Like you get caught up in, well, I couldn't give you the ride on that one day because this happened. But so you don't want to point to one example, but being able to say like, there have been several times over the last few months or in the last year where, I was struggling and needed somebody to listen to me. And I often felt like when I called, you weren't able to listen or, whatever, but giving a more generic example as opposed to pinpointing one moment, like don't use the moment where you're angry or hurt. to start this conversation, start it, from a more neutral place. And then again, it's just sort of presenting it and saying, like, I'm realizing about myself that I need certain things out of this friendship. And I'm wondering if you feel like you're able to like meet those needs. And again, as much as possible, entering that conversation from a place of feeling like you know what you're going to need, no matter how they respond. They may respond and be like, well, that sounds needy and I ain't got you. I don't like, I don't know, like call your mom. And that can be really, really hurtful, or they may get defensive. They may be really open to it, but sort of recognizing like, oh, I have to be emotionally prepared for any response, but I'm going to tell them what I really need out of the friendship. That takes a little practice because our natural tendency is to go in on, you always call me, you always need this, but the issue isn't about that they need all these things, it's that you feel like there's an imbalance. So if you can come from, I'm finding blah, 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 this is what I need more of from you. And if it is more that it's not so much that you need different things from them, but you feel like they ask a lot of you, then that's more of a checking in with yourself. What is it going to take for me to set a different boundary? If I don't like the fact that every other month I'm lending this person money, what do I need to start doing differently? Because if they're asking and you're giving, then from their perspective, this is what we do in this friendship. If you want to do something different, then oftentimes it's also recognizing you need to change your behavior. And so I think particularly, I always like to say, like, if you find yourself resentful, it usually means that there is a boundary or a need that you have that you are not adequately expressing to the other person. And so, yeah, like if you're like, every weekend, I always have to drive, or every vacation, I always end up covering like all our meals out, or whatever it is, stop doing it. I mean, it really does boil down to that. It's likely that it will lead to conversation, but sometimes it is also just checking ourselves. Like, well, every relationship is a dance. Like I'm also doing my part here. Let me change my behavior and see what happens. Because sometimes you change your behavior and that person is fine. Like it's not an issue at all. Mm-hmm. You say no and they move on to another friend, or, they figure out how to meet their needs elsewhere and the friendship continues. And other times it will mean a change or even an ending of a friendship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think being okay with or accepting that may happen, right? Mm-hmm. When you have those needs. Now, what about if you really want to keep the friendship, but you do want to have these boundaries? Like, I'm not picking you up. I'm not coming to your rescue. I'm not being your therapist because I told you to get a therapist. Like, I'm not doing these things anymore. I just want to be your friend without all the things that comes with it. How can someone address that? I mean, how can they have that conversation with the other friend when you also know that a lot of us already have those things that we preconceive notions of maybe why, oh, she just don't want to do this because she got a new man, or oh, she thinks she's better than me because she got a new job now, so she don't want to help me, or oh, she got a new, all these things that can come up. How do you handle that when you may expect your friend to kind of respond like that, but you want to keep the friendship?
Sometimes we have to, in some ways I feel like a broken record, but it is really being okay with the fact that other people get to choose. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're going to choose things that's not what we want. Like, I want us to continue to be friends, but this particular behavior has to stop for me. And yeah, I'd like to say, like, loving other, I was going to say adults, but the truth is loving any other human being in part is about honoring their autonomy, which means I get to say to you, I don't like this. I need this to change. This is what I want. This is what I can give. And I have to be able to honor the fact that you might be like, okay, well, if that's what being friends with you looks like, I don't want it. I'm
Mhm.
out. And and giving yourself the space to grieve that. And I think that goes back to the way in which, unfortunately, like our society and our culture elevates essentially romantic relationship above everything else when at a certain point in adulthood. And so we don't make space for friendships are honestly some of the most important relationships you're going to have in your life.
Mhm. Mhm.
Most of us are going to have friends that last longer than, boyfriends and girlfriends and, significant others, that are going to carry us through a variety of chapters of our lives. And so those relationships, when they end, it is really sad. There is something to grieve in that. And also those relationships I think are worth fighting for and working on and putting in the effort. And unfortunately, we just don't get a lot of encouragement or models to do that.
Yeah, that's really true. Um, I love that you said that because we don't. What are some signs that maybe the friendship is ending or that you're outgrowing the friendship? What are some things that people can kind of look for?
If you're finding, in some ways, like any other close, intimate relationship, right? So if you're finding that there's a lot of conflict, if you're feeling particularly disconnected, um, I think particularly with friends, if you're finding that things you once would call that person for, right? Like something happened at work or something happened, in your dating life. And, in the past, that would have been the first phone call you made to share that news, be it good or bad. And you're finding like you're leaning into other people. Those are probably some key signs that things are changing. I don't think it always means that things are ending, but it does mean that are changing. Sometimes it's also just life transition. And I think it's important to recognize too that some of your friendships, if you talk about it, are going to ebb and flow, right? Like there's, um, like I have a friend, I mean, we've known I don't remember a time in my life that I didn't know her.
Hmm.
Like, as long as I have a memory of like people, like we've known each other. I mean, she's like a sister to me. And our lives ebb and flow. Like we live in different states and like was married with kids and she wasn't. And then, my kids were older and she was having babies and there were like years where, I don't know, we would talk to each other 5 or 6 times for the year.
Hmm.
And then there's like years where we talk to each other 5 or 6 times a day. Right. But and not every friendship necessarily is going to have that, certainly over that length of time.
Right.
But there are, I think, a lot of friendships where it was like, okay, well, we used to be roommates. The ways in which your life were intertwined versus one of you moves across country for a job, somebody else, has a kid or gets a dog or whatever, your lives are different.
Right.
And so there are things that are like top of mind and sort of present priorities on a day-to-day basis that you no longer share in common. And so you might not talk as much. That doesn't always mean that the emotional connection is different. But again, you have to sort of be willing to talk about the fact that sometimes you might really miss that friend. It doesn't mean that at some other chapter in your life, you may not find yourselves closer to each other if you're willing to make the effort.
Yeah. I have one of those friends, just like you. Um, we, like you said, it might be, we can go the whole year and maybe talk 3 or 4 times, right? She's a
Mhm.
mom, she's, you know, married, she has all these things going on. But whenever we talk, we catch back up. And then, we're always there for each other's special moments. If someone's getting married or someone's having a
Mhm.
baby. So you're right. Those things happen. Like, yes, we used to talk every day in college and we spent all our time together, and then we get older and it looks different, but it doesn't mean I don't love her any less. Like that's still like one of my best friends. I still consider her one of my best friends, even though, the
Yeah.
relationship has changed. So I'm glad you brought that up. Um, what if friends, what if the friend that you're talking about doesn't know that you've kind of outgrown, or you feel like you've outgrown them and you're ready to make that transition. I think we already kind of talked about really like making that transition and having that
Mhm.
conversation. But if you don't want to have that conversation, just having that behavior, or not the behavior, kind of go ahead and start to shift some of the things that you're doing. If the friend brings it up to you and say, hey, like kind of what's going on, I don't want it to change. Is that something that you bring up to a friend, or you, is that something that you say to a friend, like, yeah, I know you don't want it to change, but this is kind of how I want it? Because in relationships, right, it's always a give and take, right? It's a compromise. Like, okay, you
Mhm.
may want this, I want that. How do we meet in the middle? So if a friend is like, well, I really don't want to give up what we had, but you're at the space where I'm okay with kind of giving that up, how can you meet in the middle? Or do you not even meet in the middle? Do you just honor where you are in your space, regardless of what the other person kind of wants?
I think if you're really clear that you're in a space that you're ready and wanting to let the friendship go, or for it to be significantly different than what it was, um, I think you have to honor that, right? You have to honor where you are, because the truth is, if that's if that's genuinely how you feel, then even though they're asking you for something different, if you say yes, you're going through the motions. Like, and that's also not like, that's not really fair. And that's not really, you're not really giving them authentic friendship. You're sort of setting them up for later conflict and resentment, because you're like, I'm doing these things because you want them. And really, if somebody's saying, like, I love our friendship and I want these things with you, like, they want the friendship. They want to know that you also are invested in the same way. And if you're not going to be, you owe them, I think you owe them the honesty. If they're willing to be honest and vulnerable, to come to you and say, like, I'm missing our time together. And those are hard conversations to have. But I think that there's also value in being able to show up in that way, and in some ways honor at least what the friendship used to be for you, even though it may be different now, and saying, yeah, I hear that. And again, I, as much as possible, trying to sort of focus on it from a you perspective, as opposed to like what's wrong with them perspective. So I hear that you need, my sense is that you need XYZ out of this friendship, and I don't have the capacity, or I'm not in a place in my life where that's what I really am ready or willing or able or wanting to give to you, or and I like to say to this relationship, because that feels a little less personal,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's not so much them, it's like this interaction, this dynamic between you and I doesn't work anymore. It just doesn't for me. And I'm really sorry. And, and here's what I'm willing to do or not do. But I think that there's, and there's opportunity for growth on both sides, particularly if you've gotten to that place in part because of things that that friend has done, or ways that you feel like the relationship was not reciprocal, or ways in which you felt maybe disrespected or hurt. Um, if you can share that from a place that is not quite so like blaming, or like, I don't think confrontation is a bad thing, but like, not in such an argumentative way, but you can share with them, like, these are things that have happened over the years that at this point, like, I just don't feel whatever about the friendship anymore.
Right.
Um, it's a growth on your side, being, learning how to have courageous conversations with people, because that there's a lot of vulnerability in sharing that.
Right.
And it offers that person the opportunity to maybe do some self-reflection. It's not your job to make them self-reflect. So don't share it because you're like, well, I'm gonna help her grow. Don't do that. But if they ask, there's an opportunity to share something that they might then take away from it that could be beneficial to them in the future.
Yeah. It made me think of another thing. So what if you are that friend that is being told, like, hey, this isn't me anymore? What do you need to do for yourself so that you can be okay in an okay space, so you don't lash out at them, or, you know, say that you're changing? What can you do?
I think again, it's like, I mean, it really is like any other breakup, right? Like we have to kind of be okay. Oh, I'm sad. Oh, I feel rejected. I feel, I'm grieving this relationship. I think also sometimes we don't want to, for those of us who are not super comfortable with like change, sometimes you think you want to keep things the same. And so it's also an opportunity for you to reflect, was that friendship really working for you? Because I got to be honest, as somebody, as a therapist who works primarily with relationships and with couples, I have yet to meet the couple where one person was genuinely like one up when they started to really do some self-reflection, was genuinely happy in a relationship with a partner who was unhappy. So if you have a friend that's like, I don't want to be your friend anymore, the odds are fairly high that there was an aspect of the friendship that wasn't working for you either. And maybe you just were not paying attention to it. You didn't want to acknowledge it. You thought it would go away, whatever. So take it as an opportunity for you to also do some soul searching. Like, did this really work for me? If it did, then what's that about? Like, this person saying like, I felt like this friendship had ended and like I didn't feel particularly close to you, then what was happening for you that you continued to feel close or felt like your needs were being met? And is that the sort of friendship you want to be in? I think most of us kind of from a healthy relationship standpoint want to be in relationships that feel reciprocal. And I don't mean it's not a one for one, you do this for me, then I do the exact same thing for you, but that what we give of ourselves emotionally is also what we get back emotionally. And it can look different, but that it feels like kind of an equal exchange of emotional energy. And yeah, if you find that you're on the receiving end of like, hey, this isn't working for me anymore, I expect that to be sad. I expect for you to grieve that. But also maybe use it as an opportunity to ask yourself, was it working for me? And if it wasn't, what got in the way of me being able to say to this person that it wasn't working for me either?
Yeah, I love it. That was so good. I appreciate all of that. I mean, so many gems out of that I think people can take from it. No matter what side you're on, I think you can
Mhm.
learn a lot from that. Something that I'm trying to do now at the end of the show is let people learn our therapist, right? So I'm going to just shoot off a couple questions for you. It's all about you, so don't feel any pressure. But this is just a good way for people to start knowing who you are and what you like.
Sure.
So, flats or heels?
I'm gonna say heels, even though to be fair, like my whole post-pandemic life has been nothing but sneakers and flats. But generally across my lifetime, definitely heels.
Okay. Favorite childhood cereal?
Don't make fun of me. Boo Berry with the like little blue ghost and the marshmallows that you could only get at Halloween. Yeah, 100%.
Hilarious. Favorite TV show? Of all times, now, later, past?
Oh gosh. That's such a hard question to answer. This is the hardest one. Okay. Let's see. Favorite as a kid might have been Facts of Life, like as a little kid. Currently, I love The Bear and
Yep.
Only Murders in the Building.
Funny.
Random shows.
Yeah, I've actually seen both. So yeah, I'm with you. I love it. Okay. Favorite actress?
Oh, favorite actress. Nia Long or Angela Bassett.
Mm,
You know what? Yeah, I think I just like Angela Bassett as like a person,
I know. Me too.
right? Like it's not even like, oh, I love her work. I mean, her work is great,
Awesome, right?
obviously,
Yeah. Mhm, mhm.
but I'm like, oh, like I love Angela Bassett, like as like a a woman in the world.
Right.
But I like Nia Long's work.
Favorite guilty pleasure, which I don't like to call them guilty pleasures, but everybody know that.
Favorite guilty pleasure. On TV, F-Boy Island.
Ah.
And to eat would probably be gummy bears. Yeah, like I don't buy them because I would eat them all.
Hilarious. Okay, what if just one thing, if you wanted people to take away from today, anything about friendships, like what's one main thing? If they can't remember anything else, what's one thing that you want them to know about today, about the talk about friendships and transitioning friendships, and maybe them looking different or maybe them ending?
Friendships are important. I think that if there's one takeaway, like your friendships are a like foundational part of like your life, of your emotional well-being. And just like any other relationship, they are going to evolve and grow with you and sometimes not with you. But it's worth the effort. So whether that's ending a friendship, changing a friendship, starting a new friendship, it's always worth putting in the actual like relational work to figure out what you need most, because those are really important.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, let people know who you are, where you're located, how they can find you.
My name is Esther BOYKIN. I am in the Washington, D.C. area, and you can find me on Instagram. That's probably the fastest way. Esther BMFT.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.